chapter 31, going through chapter 32, verse 21. I'll be reading a portion of that. The rest of it is in your bulletin, so please keep your hands on your bulletins so that you can follow along. I want to dismiss the children for Children's Church. You guys are dismissed to be trained up in the way that you should go so that when you're older you do not depart from it. The Bible says, "Then the Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you." Down in Genesis 32, verse 9, "Then Jacob prayed, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you who said to me, go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown to your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become two camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper, and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted. Man does not live by bread alone,
but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord."
Please be seated for the preaching of the word.
Feeling stuck is a normal human experience. I know this because we have many phrases for being out of good options. I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. Out of the frying pan and into the oven. It's a catch-22. Darned if you do, darned if you don't. That's the Southern preacher's way of saying that very thing. Now, when life presents us with either the measles or the mumps, when we only have bad alternatives, something essential is diminished, and that's hope. Hope is what I've been assuming our church has needed over the last 2 years. Thank you, Craig, for helping me in this moment of mine where I lost my spot.
Hey, Craig.
Hey, Craig. Hope is what I've been assuming over the last, honestly, 2 years that we've needed in this moment. And I sincerely believe we have reason for hope. I believe that our collective COVID suffering has given us plenty of opportunity to learn more faithfulness to Christ in our circumstances. Yet beyond the control of any of us and any of us here, our country and city are seemingly becoming less Christian in both belief and practice. In many places, others are even becoming more hostile to our faith. Though this situation is a way God can purify the church, its cleansing often seems daunting. Also, we can admit that part of our trouble in the first place is because of our own neglect as Christians of God Himself. And this makes the road we have to travel towards wholeness and holiness very difficult indeed. Also, some of us have individual dilemmas that we each face. Some of you might be in a tough relationship made all the more difficult for how enmeshed your life is with that person. You might have a job that you hate but with great pay and desire a job somewhere else that could hardly pay the bills. You might feel disconnected with your current communities of work, school, or church while at the same time realizing these are the best friends I've ever had. And you just don't know what to do. We all have various levels of experience being stuck in life. And our great temptation when we're stuck is to be like the foolish person whose wheels are caught in the snow and to push the pedal to the metal. But what I'm trying to tell you today is that instead we should realize that God takes moments where we are stuck and invites us to hitch ourselves to Him that He might lead us out by His very hand. Simply, my sermon today calls us to this. When stuck, trust God to lead us forward. When you're stuck in life, let God lead you where you need to go. And God takes these moments where we're stuck to help us receive more than the next 3 steps we need. God offers us a hand and a friendship whose kindness makes our struggles light. Now today we see a man, Jacob, who is quite stuck between 2 seemingly bad choices. Continue living with his scheming, deceitful, jealous father-in-law, or move closer to Esau, who last time we met him was ready to kill Jacob. In Jacob's stuck situation, we will see today how God matures him so that he can prepare him for what's next. And showing you this will allow me to give you 3 keys for how you follow God's lead when stuck. 3 keys for following God's lead when stuck. But before I give you those 3 keys, what I want to do today is I want to tell the story of Jacob, but along the way, make sure you know the difference between those situations he's experiencing or when they're caused by his own sin or evil or foolishness, and when it's just a matter of living in a difficult world. The payoff in doing this is that it helps us to see that often the work God wants to do in our life when we're stuck is to help us address our responsibility for where we are in the first place. When God leads us out of a stuck situation, He doesn't first usually want to change our circumstances, but rather our posture towards our circumstances. And we need to be crystal clear from that on the beginning. If you're going to expect me to tell you that your biggest problem is what you're going through instead of how you're handling it, you're going to be frustrated at me from the onset, I must tell you. And as a reminder, Jacob is the grandson of Abraham, the recipient of God's promise that he would have a group of people in his line be a blessing to all the world. And Jacob is the son of Isaac, the son chosen of Abraham to continue that promise. And Jacob's older twin Esau is the one Jacob swindled out of a birthright and blessing. So Jacob again had to flee home for safety and went to his uncle Laban's house. And at Laban's house, Jacob meets Rachel, who he's enamored with, mostly because of her beauty. And in his love sickness, Jacob is swindled into taking Rachel's older sister Leah as a bride from the beginning. And between those two sisters and their handmaidens, we learned last week that Jacob already has fathered 10 boys and at least 1 girl up until this point. And moreover, through cunning and skill, we will see today that God blesses Jacob as well and increases his flock in riches, while Laban, the deceitful father-in-law, is losing ground to him in wealth and possession very fast. Now, all that introduction allows me to tell you that even before today's events, we are aware that there are certain reasons Jacob is in the position that he's in. Many of his actions and vices have led him exactly where he is. The deception of his father, the trickery of his brother, and of course his obsession with physical beauty is noted as a means by which Jacob is caused to be stuck. But we will learn today also that Laban's crimes against Jacob go beyond merely swindling him into marrying Leah. He is far worse than that towards Jacob. Now, when we begin our story today, Jacob hears that Laban's sons are jealous of Jacob's success. And he also notes that Laban isn't favorable to him any longer. And after hearing God tell Jacob to return home, he tells his wife that God is ready to send him back because of his success and because of what he has learned in the process. And last week's passage focused on Jacob and how he tried to use a certain pagan ritual to ensure his speckled flocks increased. And today, Jacob makes clear that though he used dubious methods to accomplish this thing, God was actually the one behind all of the increase. Read Genesis 31:9 with me if I can find it. It says this, "So God has taken away your father's livestock and has given them to me." So clearly at this moment, there's something that hasn't been present in Jacob's life. He's realizing God's hand. And when he explains how much God has provided it to his two wives, Leah and Rachel, he wonders if they're ready to follow him to what's next. And if there's any doubt about their feelings about the matter, read Genesis 31:15 through 16. This is their response. Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used up what was paid for us. Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you. Now pause for a minute and imagine a more bitter, a more painful set of words coming out of two daughters' mouths about their father. Last week we learned that they both competed with each other through childbearing to gain the affection of their husband Jacob. So to hear that they see Laban in even more unfavorable light, as even more responsible for their suffering than Jacob, shows how they feel about their father's tricks. These sisters cannot get away from home fast enough, a place that should have been a safe haven for them. They've been treated like strangers and property to be bartered, and they want nothing more of that. So Jacob, we can see already, is not responsible for his wife's current situation completely. Laban has treated them wretchedly, and they are done with him. Though Jacob was easily dupable because of his intense desire for Rachel, that doesn't mean that Laban is not an evil father as well, and so a part of the suffering that he experiences. So when they leave, Rachel's flawed character is also revealed. She steals her father's household idols. Why does she do that? Whether she is seeking protection or whether she's trying to pay her father back doesn't really matter. Whether she's seeking help because of her polytheistic beliefs or because she really wants to get at her dad isn't the point. She is revealing her flawed character at this particular moment. And it's kind of obviously humorous, right? That she's doing something like what one author calls God napping. And clearly the story is showing at this point the impotence of household deities and any other god that humans make to the true God, Yahweh. You can steal one of those gods. Now Jacob had wisely given himself a 3-day cushion to get away from Laban. He is traveling with wives, kids, and flocks, and everyone knows a road trip with only one child even adds quite a few hours. So Jacob is for certain traveling about as slow as any one of us can handle. Eventually Laban hears about his successful son-in-law and daughters also leaving. So he takes his sons and many servants and pursues them for 7 days. And again, Jacob's family is going to be very vulnerable from a military perspective. I mean, he's taking his little kids, he's taking his wives, and he's taking a bunch of animals, while Laban has a bunch of adult men on his side. But the night before Laban meets up with Jacob, he is warned in a dream not to harm Jacob. This should sound familiar if you've been with us in Genesis for some time. God has several times already visited someone in a dream to protect his chosen one, and this happens yet again. Now, when Laban meets up with Jacob, he pays lip service to the fact that Jacob should not have left without letting him say goodbye to his grandchildren and his daughters. How could he do such a thing? But then he turns around and accuses someone of stealing his household gods. We're not told how he knew, but he knew. And Jacob says, "No way, come and check us." And of course he doesn't know about Rachel at this particular point, because he says, he actually says some quite harsh things about what would happen to such a person. So when Laban makes a search and finally comes to Rachel, she has to actually pull a little trickery out of her own sleeve and says, "It's my monthly period and I can't stand for you, Father." And she's hiding the household gods below her. And this little god thief has learned from her father and her husband the art of trickery to the best degree. She has some of her own. And so Laban cannot find the gods and is rebuked by Jacob. And then Jacob describes how stuck he had been because of his father-in-law's evil, and that God intends to protect him in Genesis 31, 38 through 42. Read that with me. It says this: "I have been with you for 20 years now. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself, and you demanded payment for me, whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime and the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes. It was like this for 20 years I was in your household. I worked for you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would have surely sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night He rebuked you. Now again, Jacob is responsible for many of his situations, but you hear in that just how bitterly Laban has treated him. Jacob has been treated like a slave, and it forewarns the sort of treatment that Egypt should avoid against Israel and anyone else against God's chosen people in the future. And this incident also shows us just how, in fact, Jacob realizes Laban has always been wanting to do more, but God has been the one protecting him. That's also important to keep in mind. So Laban just disingenuously calls for a covenant and for Jacob to protect his family and daughters in a way that Laban never would or could. So God delivers Jacob out of Laban's hand, but there's still Esau to face. So when Jacob finally continues on his journey into the area called Mahanaim, I think I pronounced that correctly, he sends his messengers to the land of Seir to his brother Esau. Yes, the brother who wanted him dead years earlier. God says, go back to that land. The brother he swindled for a birthright. The brother whose blessing he deceived to steal. He is going back to that land, and he's going back to face him. And God told him to do this. So you would expect that he would be ready to receive him favorably after all these years, right? Well, let's see. Read Genesis 32, 5 through 6. Just 6. It says this: When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, we went to your brother Esau, and now he has come to meet you, and 400 men are with him. Well, what could that possibly mean? I don't know. Well, it's not good for Jacob, it seems. So Jacob has certainly left, to use that phrase that I mentioned in the very beginning, the frying pan to fly straight into the furnace. And if Laban was mad, you can bet that Esau is madder, and he's finally got a chance. So Jacob initially breaks his family up into 2 parts, hoping that if one is attacked, the other can escape. Jacob prays very fervently after this, and we'll come to that in a moment, and that's very unlike him. Now, after the prayer, Jacob prepares a massive gift of flocks and all sorts of wonderful things for his brother, and offers instructions to his servants on how to give those gifts to Esau in waves. Now, the story ends there. Kind of an open-ended ending before we get to a great visitation again from God. In the meantime, let me recall that Jacob, genuinely from his perspective, is in a stuck situation still. He still needs God's help, and he has been for a long time. He's only had bad options in his life. And God led him out, to be sure, but even as we end right now, from Jacob's vantage point, he's still in a very vulnerable position. But at least he's no longer under Laban's heavy hand. What we see when we see that Jacob was the chosen one, was living like a lowlife under his father's harsh rule. And life and choices had put him there. But no other choice along the way was so instrumental in his stuck situation as the one to treat God merely as the Lord of his grandfather Abraham and his father Isaac. Today is the first strong sign that Jacob is finally making God his Lord. Finally. This great omission from a biblical standpoint is exactly his biggest problem. And the way that God intends to lead Jacob where he wants him to go is by first addressing his biggest dilemma, that God is not Lord just yet. Now, I want to therefore make the case that your biggest problem is the same. That your biggest problem is a communion with God issue, and God wants to address that in different ways. And today's scripture offers me 3 keys that I want to give you right now as I end. Key number 1, when stuck, reflect on God's provision. When stuck, reflect on God's provision. I draw your attention to one of the few times that Jacob acknowledges God's care and protection for him up to this point. Remember, Jacob has hardly even mentioned God as his own. And this is what he says again in Genesis 31, 6 and then 9. It says, you know You know that I've worked for your father with all my strength. Excuse me. Yes, 31:6 and 9. Then the Lord, excuse me, sorry about that. I'm lost a little bit here. Excuse me, just 9. It says, so God has taken away your father's livestock and has given them to me. I repeat that verse because I want us to know that sometimes when life does not go according to plan, we need to honor that the best part of our life up to this point has been because God has given it to us. And finally, Jacob is realizing that all along God has been with him, even if he's put God on the sidelines. Reflecting on God's provision on everything as basic as food, water, and shelter, to the fine-tuning of the universe, to those situations in your past where God opened one door and slammed another, helps us see something essential that we cannot do without. We are always, always, always at our best when God is seen as the source of all that we have. When God is seen as provider and we realize how God has brought us safely thus far, we will be ready to say, God can now lead me safely home. We will always be ready to detach from our stuff, from our view that our time is our own, or even our very lives are our own, only when we can look back and say, God has given us so much that we need, and we can trust Him with what lies ahead. Seeing God as provider helps us see what we should do next. Until you get there, you're not ready for what's next. People often ask me, they want to know what God's will is for their life. And usually they want God to tell them what to do. But if we look back honestly at God's provision in our life, we realize that God's best gifts in our life were not like a fortune cookie or a magic 8-ball. Rather, what makes life rich for us, those that know God as Lord, is realizing along the way God has been with us, irrespective of whether we know what lies ahead. It's far more important for us to know who will take care of us than to know step-by-step instructions for what lies ahead for our successful life that we want. Because God actually wants to redefine that too. Jacob finally realizes God's hand in causing his flocks to thrive while Laban's continued to struggle. Jacob, along the way, to be sure, used his skill, worked hard, and was focused. But God was the one who gave the increase. And Jacob needed to realize how God provided in spite of the mess he made along the way. When Jacob left home, he was spoiled by mommy, frankly speaking. He didn't credit God for his blessed situation. When we live our lives like we are okay on our own, or we built ourselves, or we made ourselves, or that we have to provide for ourselves apart from God's hand, we are going backwards. Jacob goes through a 14-year service plus 6 years more, 20 years total, painful experience to have his eyes open to all that God's been doing along the way, that he might learn who ought to be in charge. Until he realized who had been taking care of him, he was not ready for the next step, which is this, or the next key, which is this. Key number 2, when stuck, submit fully to God's direction. When stuck, submit fully to God's direction. Again, the most obvious recognition that Jacob has finally realized this is important to do is in Genesis 31:3. We have not seen this call from God and a response of obedience yet from Jacob to the same degree. Then the Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. A promise that is a reiteration of what God had promised before. Now I want you to see, it's no accident that right after Jacob realized Laban and his sons were beginning to feel threatened by him, that's the very moment God spoke. And Jacob hasn't really been hearing from God at all these many years, except after he had that dream with angels ascending and descending from heaven to earth. Nor has Jacob consulted God. In fact, God's presence in many of the stories we have seen has been muted, except for when Leah names her children. Though the text doesn't make it plain, it isn't a far leap to realize Jacob isn't really ready yet until this moment to follow God's direction, even though he's been suffering greatly all those years. Throughout this entire passage, we note a different sensitivity from Jacob to God's presence than he had shown before, a different ownership of God as his own. It wasn't until Jacob realized just stuck how he had been that he was ready to really let God lead him out. So it is for us. And again, many of us are accustomed to asking, what is God's will for my life? What's God's will for this? And I've become convinced, even for myself, and I must confess, I guess, that we're really not that interested in the answer to the question. For God's will isn't really revealed primarily in answers like, go work there, or go marry this person, or live in this place. Rather, God's will for our life is revealed in commands like this. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. Make disciples of all nations, and seek the interest of others in God's will. Ooh, that's kind of hard. Often we don't get very far in focusing on improvement in these areas before we start saying, I don't like that part of God's will. Let me ask the questions that I probably won't ever know the answer to with perfect clarity about next steps. And if you follow my reasoning here, there really are two ways that we become clearer on what's next. The first way is to obey God in what He has clearly taught us already, and then God's values become ours, helping us to learn to make steps that He would please Him. And we can be confident in the pleasure of God no matter what the outcomes of our decision might be. The second option is we get stuck, we suffer some, and then we have to go back to what I just said and learn that we have to learn to internalize what God likes before we can even have any real sight or really even be ready to hear what God wants for us in the next place. Jacob is one who had to go through terrible turmoil before he would realize that he did not have resources within himself to produce anything good. He had children, to be sure. That blessing was again from God's hand. Yet he was still living in great animosity and a lack of wholeness, mostly because of his past struggles. Jacob needed to be stuck before he would seek God's leadership. Jacob had to feel like he had nowhere to go before he would reach out for mercy. And again, I hope the same isn't true for us. But I also want you to hear me today. If you are stuck, I want you to see that as a circumstantial invitation by God to let Him lead your life. If you think your biggest problems in life right now are the people you're with, the job you're working, or the place you're living, you haven't learned one of the biggest lessons from the story of Jacob and actually Scripture itself that you need to learn. We are often most stuck when we care little for God's lead. And the person that you see each day in the mirror is the biggest reason why. And until we take those last few sentences seriously, we're not ready for the growth in Christ that we need to see. For there's nothing more essential in our life when stuck than to submit fully to God's lead. And let me say it just a little bit differently as I end this point. What gives us reason to believe we would agree with God's will in the particulars of our life if we will not agree with God in the universals He has given to all humans? The truth is, until we are ready to say yes to God's plain instructions, we are not really ready to follow God in what we cannot be certain about with 100% truth. Until we are ready to follow God's complete leadership, we will not have any clarity on what lies ahead. And the good news at the very core of our message today, I want to help us see, is that no matter how stuck you feel, if you want God to lead you out, He will. Isn't our message about a man who was crucified and laid in a grave on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and then when He rose, He said, anybody who will follow me will come out of the grave forever? The grave itself isn't even a place that we become so stuck that God cannot lead us out if we submit ourselves to Him. So when stuck, be sure to submit yourselves fully to God. Key number 3, when stuck, plead for God's promised protection. Now this key comes from Jacob's most clear, thoughtful, and thorough prayer, what we see in Genesis 32, 9 through 12. This seems like a very different man to me, having followed him for a little bit. Again, Genesis 32, 9 through 12. Oh, that's why I was lost before. I was in the wrong chapter.
Yeah.
It says this, "Then Jacob prayed, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, who said to me, go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become two camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said," and this is the key to my point, "I will surely make you prosper and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted." Again, Jacob seems like he's in a terrible, stuck spot. But note how his prayer ends. He recognizes that God's promises to him and to his grandfather Abraham and father Isaac cannot be completed if Esau brings harm to him and his family. So Jacob prays in light of what God's already promised. And when we become serious about following God's lead in light of His past provision, let me tell you something. You're going to face some trouble in life. You're going to face danger, both physical and spiritual. And both are important to God. Both parts of who you are. For body and soul, by the way, are so tightly intertwined that where one begins and where one ends isn't easily reckoned from human observation. Physical danger, we know, can lead to spiritual anguish. And so we must pray for protection of body and soul, and both are necessary. And we do that because Jesus tells us, in fact, that if you follow Him, you're going to have some trouble. He said, they hated me, they will hate you. Jesus said, in this world you'll have trouble, even though He said, take heart, I've overcome the world. Jesus was preparing us and His first disciples for physical attack that could threaten even their deepest trust in God. And because of the fact that we realize that there's a spiritual part of who we are and a physical part of who we are, and that God has promised suffering while He's also taught us to pray for protection physically, leaves us confused about how to pray in the first place. Are we to pray for protection or for God to help us endure persecution or difficulty? The truth is, we're taught to pray for both. They're not antagonistic to one another. God loves to give good gifts to His children and to provide. So we pray for our church, for example, that we would be able to continue to worship on the beach and inside in the 400 when we go inside. We also pray that if we are mistreated, that we would not return the favor or lose trust in God. Prayers for our entire well-being are an important way that God calls us into deeper fellowship with Himself. Now, some teach us that we should pray and expect blessings and no trouble in life. This is famously called the health and wealth gospel. And such teaching minimizes those words of Jesus that promise difficulty. Now, some others make the opposite error and criticize all prayers for protection and bodily needs. And I want to say to us that on a very basic level, we, like Jacob, need to learn that no prayer brought to God is ever chastised. That's sincere, and especially those that are brought in His name. I mean, how many of us, if you're like me, I don't know, I'm imposing myself on you for a little bit here, if you'll allow me to do that. How many of us have been discouraged from praying because of the interesting fact that we learned that God already knows what we need, or that hardships will come and that we should be prepared for them? And the problem is that Jesus Himself teaches us that these are the very reasons we ought to pray. That we ought to go to God at any time about anything that matters to us, especially related to the protection of our body and soul, in response to the kind, loving, generous character of God. And I've heard people criticize the foxhole Christian, the person that only prays when in deep trouble. And to be sure, I don't want to minimize the point some people make about the foxhole prayer. We would all be well if we could be well-fed, rich, happy, and healthy in a tropical paradise and still hit our knees asking for God's mercy. That would be great maturity. I aspire to that kind of dependence on God, and I'm far away from that. Still, I want to insist there's no time where God isn't ready for us to turn to Him for help. He always wants us to return to Him. And I want us to see that Jacob has been in trouble for 13 years. It took him 13 years. Don't let it take you that long. Just say, God, help, 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 help. I'm lost. Don't wait to hit your knees. Don't feel like because you're stuck, you have to run away from God. That's exactly what He wants you to hit the knees. God. And I mean that literally, by the way. Hit the knees. physical posture matters because God, it teaches us that He cares about body and soul, dear friends. We are always encouraged to pray for protection, even if we're encouraged to pray for more. We're never encouraged to pray for less. And God invites us in these experiences of fog, of being unclear on what's next, of being even in a position of great vulnerability, to teach us a language that should be so basic to God's children. God, give me this day my daily bread and keep me from evil. And oddly enough, I think, and again, I might be speaking for myself here, I find that many of us are stuck spiritually precisely because our spirituality is merely spiritual. It isn't connected to body reality and what I'm going to do tomorrow. We speak of God leading us, but take no steps anywhere He would take us in the first place. And because of that, we really don't understand how God's actually involved in our day-to-day lives. And what I want to help us understand, the first thing God is trying to do when stuck isn't trying to invite us into some higher state of knowledge or state of understanding, but a basic response of dependence. God, help me. I'm afraid. God, protect me. I'm not strong enough for this. God, you have brought me here. I cannot go past without your help. And when we see that God provides, we place ourselves under God's leadership, that we might be completely led by Him and even bring our most seemingly insignificant prayers to Him. This is the way forward when stuck. You recognize God's provision and you say, He is the only one that should lead, and I will seek His help in anything and everything. Now, I began our sermon today talking about being stuck because of only having bad options. Now, ironically, I'm going to end by suggesting that we are in a unique situation, historically speaking, that more of us are stuck not because we only have bad options, but because we have way too many options. It is also my persuasion that the feeling of being stuck in life is becoming not just an incidental, accidental thing along the way, but it's becoming chronic and persistent in our culture. In our world of more and more options, the FOMO and FOBO world, fear of missing out or fear of better options world in which we're mired, it keeps us fearful from commitment. It keeps us worried that we're going to enter irrevocable misery if we just say yes to this or that thing. We worry choosing one path will lead us in the wrong direction and that God can't even get us out of that. Pity that thought, folks. It's silly. 20 years being stuck. Can God lead us out of whatever decision we make as long as we learn to trust Him along the way? The way forward, again, is to hit our knees. When there, we acknowledge that God has provided, He wants to lead us, and He will take care of us one way or another. He will keep His safe. And so now, I invite you, turn to Him. Turn to Him. Do not wait. If you are a believer in Christ and you're feeling stuck, turn to Him now and realize and be honest enough to say, I've lost my way somehow. If you have not followed Christ with your heart, that means that you've said to Jesus, you are Lord, you are Savior. I need you to rescue me from this body of death. Please talk to me, talk to Steve, talk to anybody else that's been up here leading. I want to help you understand how He will save you and lead you on. Let's pray. Father, I want to thank you so much for, again, even though it's cold, it didn't rain. And even though we all don't know all the ins and outs of how you are going to lead us tomorrow, we trust that you want to be with us here today. And so we magnify your name, we glorify and honor your name. We believe that your Spirit has been present with us even now, and so we delight in that fact. We ask you to lead us forward, we pray. Lead us where you want us to go, that we might become